Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Campfire Ghost Stories. This is Cait, and I'm happy to be here with you for our last campfire of the summer. We will be taking a brief hiatus while we bid goodbye to the long days of summer reading and welcome in longer nights of fall programming. To tide you over, I'm doing a slightly longer reading from Joyce Carol Oates' collection, The Doll Master, and Other Tales of Terror. I'm sticking with the title story today because it gave me a certain creepy, crawly sensation that stuck with me long after I read it. I'm hoping you find it just as memorable. Before I begin, a quick reminder that these tales are not chosen for younger audiences, and this one in particular will be challenging for younger listeners. So clear out the little ones, tuck them into bed, lock up the door to your office or bedroom, and prepare to be suitably unsettled. Thank you, and enjoy. The Doll Master. You can hold her, but don't drop her. Solemnly, my little cousin Amy spoke, and solemnly, Amy held out to me her beloved doll. It was a baby doll, in baby clothes, a little top adorned with pink baby ducklings, and on the tiny baby doll feet, little pink booties, and a baby diaper, white, with a silver safety pin. A soft, fleshy baby doll with a placid baby face, malleable baby fingers, and fleshy little baby arms and legs that you could manipulate to a degree. The baby hair was fine and blonde and curly, and the baby eyes were slate blue marble that opened and closed as you tilted the doll backward or forward. There is a scary, ticklish sensation when you see a baby close up, because you think the baby could be hurt. And this is how I felt about baby Emily, though she was only a doll. My cousin Amy was 3 years old, which was younger than me by 11 months. This is what we were told. A birthday is an important event in our family, our parents said. Amy was the daughter of my mother's younger sister, who was my Aunt Jill. So Mommy explained, Amy was my cousin. I was a little jealous sometimes. Amy could talk better than I could, and adults liked to talk to her, marveling at her speech skills, which made me feel bad, for nobody marveled at mine. Amy was a little girl, shorter than me, small all over than me. It was strange. Friends of our mother's thought it was darling to see such a small child as Amy clutching a baby doll, fussing and fretting over baby Emily as Amy's mother fussed and fretted over her, even pretending to nurse baby Emily with a tiny baby bottle filled with milk, and changing baby Emily's diaper. Between her fleshy baby legs, baby Emily was smooth. There was no way for baby Emily to soil her diaper. I did not remember ever soiling my diaper. I do not remember now. I'm inclined to think that as a baby I did not have to wear a diaper, but that is probably inaccurate and irrational. For I was a fully normal boy infant, I am sure. There were accidents in the night, especially in my PJs, as my mother called them. I do not remember. I do not remember nursing either. I think that I was nursed from a bottle. All this is a very long time ago. It's natural not to remember. You can hold her, but don't drop her. These were Amy's words, which I do not remember. They were an echo of an adult mother's words, which you often hear. It was a terrible surprise in the family when Amy passed away. At first, they said that Amy was going to a clinic for tests. Then they said that Amy would be in the hospital for a few days. Then they said that Amy would not be coming home from the hospital. In all this time, I was not taken to the hospital to see Amy. I was told that my cousin would be home soon. You can see her then, sweetie. That will be soon enough. And your cousin is very tired right now. Your cousin needs to sleep and rest and get strong again. Afterward, I would learn that it was a rare blood sickness my cousin had. It was a kind of leukemia and very fast-acting in young children. When they said that Amy would not be coming home, I did not say anything. I did not ask any questions. I did not cry. I was stony-faced. I overhear my aunt saying to my mother, I wondered if to be stony-faced was a bad thing or a good thing, for then people let you alone. If you cried, they tried to comfort you, but if you were stony-faced, they let you alone. It was around this time that I stole baby Emily out of Amy's room. We were often at my aunt's house, and while my mother and my aunt were crying together, I went to Amy's room and lifted baby Emily from my cousin's bed, where the doll was lying with other less interesting dolls and stuffed toys, as if someone had flung them all down and had not even made up the bed properly. I did not think that my parents knew that I'd stolen baby Emily inside my jacket and brought her home with me. But later, I would realize that they probably knew, as my aunt knew, and did not say anything to me. They did not discipline me. Talk was all of Amy for a long time. If you entered a room and adults were speaking in lowered voices, they would cease at once. Bright adult faces turned toward you. Hello, Robbie. I was too young to consider whether such a rare blood sickness might be genetic, that is, carried in the blood from one generation to the next. When I was older, I would research leukemia on the internet, but still, I would not know. When I was alone with baby Emily, we cried because we missed Amy. I did not cry because Amy was dead, only because Amy was gone. But I had Amy's baby doll. I snuggled with baby Emily in my bed, and that made me feel better, a little. When I was 5 years old and going to preschool, baby Emily disappeared from my room. I was so surprised. I looked under the bed and in the closet and in each of my bureau drawers, and then I looked in all these places again, as well as beneath the covers at the foot of the bed. But baby Emily was gone. I ran to my mother crying. I asked my mother where baby Emily was, for there was no secret about my cousin's doll baby now. My mother told me that my father didn't think it was a good idea for me to be playing with a doll at my age. Dolls are for girls, she said, not boys. Daddy just thought it might be better to take the doll away before you got too attached. Guiltily, my mother spoke, and there was a softness in her voice, but nothing I said could change her mind. No matter how I cried or how angry I became, slapping and kicking at her and saying how I hated her, my mother did not change her mind because my father would not allow it. He said he'd indulged you long enough, and he blames me. In place of baby Emily, who was so sweet and placid and smelled of foam rubber, my father had instructed my mother to buy me an action toy. One of the new model expensive ones, a U.S. Navy SEAL robot soldier that came fully armed and could move forward across the room, empowered by a battery. I would never forgive either of them, I thought, but particularly, I would never forgive him. The first of the found dolls was Mariska. Take her, but don't drop her. My friend spoke quietly, urgently, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. Many times I'd walk to school and home from school, avoiding the school bus where the older boys were who taunted me. My family's house was at the top of Prospect Hill, above the city, and looking toward the river, which was often wreathed in mist. The middle school was about a mile down the hill along a route I'd come to memorize. Often I took shortcuts through alleys and across backyards where I moved swiftly with the furtiveness of a wild creature. This street was Catamount, with a narrow lane that ran parallel behind it past 6-foot wooden fences beginning to rot, trash cans and piles of debris. My friend said never make eye contact. That way they don't see you either. No one ever saw me, for I moved quickly and furtively. And if they saw me at a distance, they saw only a young boy with a blurred face. My friend was very tall, taller than my father. I had never looked directly at my friend, who forbade it, but I had a sense that my friend had features sharp and cunning as a fox's, and his natural way of moving was agile as a fox's. So I had to half run to keep up with my friend, who was inclined to impatience. Take her. No one is watching. Mariska was a beautiful ceramic doll, very different from baby Emily. Mariska had creamy ceramic skin, and on her cheeks 2 patches of rouge. She was dressed in the dirndl costume of an Eastern European peasant, white blouse, full skirt, and apron, white cotton stockings and boots. Her blonde hair was braided into 2 plaits, and she had a rosebud mouth and blue eyes with thick blonde lashes. It was strange to touch Mariska's skin, which was a hard and unyielding ceramic skin, except where it had been cracked and broken. Mariska's arms were outspread in surprise. That much a prettily dressed blonde girl with plaited hair and blue eyes could be allowed to topple from a porch railing into the mud, her hair soiled, her skirt soiled and torn, and the white stockings filthy, and her legs were at an odd angle to one another, as if the left had been twisted at the hip. Walking with my friend along the lane behind Catamount Street, and between the rotted boards of a fence, we saw Mariska. My friend gripped my right hand tightly so that the bones hurt. She is our prize. She's the one we've been waiting for. Hurry, take her. No one will see. It was a thundery dark afternoon. I was shivering with cold or with excitement, for my friend had appeared walking beside me with no warning. Often I did not see my friend for days or a week. Then my friend would appear, but I was forbidden to look at his face. When my friend came into my life, I was not certain. Mariska came into my life when I was in 8th grade, or so it was earlier than that time. Mariska's house was one of the ugly asphalt-sided houses down the hill. Not just one family lived in the house, but several families, for it was a rental, as my mother said. These people who lived down the hill, as my mother said, they were not people who lived on the hill, as we did. Yet children played here, played and shouted and laughed here at the foot of Prospect Hill, which was so very different from the crest of Prospect Hill, where my family had lived for decades. Because of the steep hill, a flight of wooden steps led down from the crude porch at the rear of Mariska's house, to be rutted ground 10 or 15 feet below. But no one walked here much. The ground was covered in debris, even raw garbage. Mariska had fallen from the porch railing where someone had carelessly set her. I thought this must have happened. Unless Mariska had been tossed from the porch by someone who had tired of her rouged cheeks, rosebud mouth, careful peasant costume. My friend said eagerly, "She is our prize. No one else can claim her now." My friend said, "Lift her. Put your hand over her mouth." My friend said, "Inside your jacket. Walk quickly. Don't run. Take the back way." Mariska was heavier than you would think. A ceramic doll is a heavy doll. Mariska's arms and legs were awkwardly spread. By force, I managed to subdue them. I could not hide Mariska in my room, where she would be found by my mother or our housekeeper. I could not hide Mariska anywhere in the house, though it was a large house with 3 stories, and many of its rooms shut off. So I brought her to the carriage house, which was used as a garage for my parents' vehicles, and as a place for storage, and where I believed the beautiful ceramic doll would be safe, wrapped in canvas many times and placed in one of the horse stalls in the cobwebby shadow. It had been proudly recounted to me. My father's grandfather had been mayor of the capital city 6 miles to the south, which was now a racially troubled city with a high crime rate. After my father's grandfather was no longer mayor, he'd moved the family to Prospect Hill in this suburb of mostly white people beside the Delaware River. In those days, there'd been horses in the carriage house, in 4 stalls at the rear. And still you could smell the animals, a faint odor of dried manure, horse sweat, hay. Here I knew that Mariska would be safe. I would come to visit her when I wished, and Mariska would always be there where I had left her, wrapped in canvas for safekeeping. When my friend did not come to me, I was very lonely. But if there had been horses in the stable, as there had been in my great-grandfather's time, I would not have been so lonely. My parents had warned me not to play in the carriage house. The roof leaked badly and was partly rotted. There was a 2nd floor that sagged in the middle, as if the boards had become rubbery. Only the front part of the carriage house was used now for my parents' vehicles, and the rest was filled with abandoned things. Furniture, tires, an old broken tricycle of mine, a baby buggy, cardboard boxes. Nothing was of use any longer, but nothing was thrown away. Hornets built their nests beneath the eaves. The buzzing was peaceful, if the hornets were not disturbed. No one had told me exactly, but I knew. My father's family had been well-to-do until the early 60s. Then, the family business had gone into decline. Bitterly, my father spoke of overseas competition. Still, the house on Prospect Hill was one of the old, large houses envied by others. There were real estate investments that continued to yield income, and my father was an accountant for a prosperous business of which he spoke with some pride. My father was not a distinguished man, or in any way unusual, except for living in one of the old, large houses on Prospect Hill, which he had inherited from his father. I thought that my father might have loved me more if he had been more successful. What a terrible thing! Now it's coming here. The terrible thing was not a robbery or a burglary, or an arson set fire, or a shooting murder, but a little girl missing here in our suburban town, and not in the capital city 6 miles to the south. The news was in all the papers, and on TV and radio. Such excitement. It was like dropping a lighted match into dried hay. You could not guess what would erupt from such a small act. At our school, we were ushered into assembly and announcements made by the principal and a police officer in a uniform. The little girl who was missing was in the 4th grade and lived on Catamount Street. And we were warned not to speak with strangers or go anywhere with strangers, and if any stranger approached us, to run away as quickly as possible and notify our parents or our teachers or Mrs. Brickett, who was our principal. At the time, it was suspected that the little girl who disappeared had been kidnapped by her own father, who lived in New Brunswick. The father was arrested and questioned, but claimed to know nothing about his daughter. For days, there was news of the missing girl. Then news of the missing girl faded, then ceased. Once a child is gone, she will not return. That is the truth we would learn in middle school. Mariska was safe in her hiding place, in the farthest horse stall in the old stable at the rear of the carriage house, behind our house, where no one would ever look. It was not my fault that my cousin Amy went away and left me. All your life, you yearn to return to what has been. You yearn to return to those you have lost. You will do terrible things to return, which no one else can understand. The second found doll was not until I was in 9th grade. Annie was a pretty-faced girl doll, with skin like real skin to touch, except some of the dye had begun to wear off, and you could see the gray rubber beneath, which was shivery and ugly. Annie was a small doll, not so large and heavy as Mariska. She wore a cowgirl costume with a suede skirt, a shiny buckled belt, a shirt with a little suede vest, and a little black tie. On her feet were cowboy boots. She had been partly broken. One of her arms was dislocated and turned too easily in its shoulder socket. Her red-orange curly hair had come out in patches to reveal the rubber scalp beneath. What was pretty about Annie was her placid blue violet marble eyes and the freckles on her face that made you want to smile. Her eyes, like baby Emily's eyes, shut when you leaned her backward and opened when you leaned her forward. My friend had seen Annie first in the park near my house. Beyond the playground, where children shouted and laughed, swinging on the swings, there was a little grove of picnic tables. Beneath one of the tables, in which initials had been carved and gouged, the cowgirl doll lay on the ground, on her back. "Here, hurry." My friend shoved me forward. My friend's hard hand was on my back. What was this, beneath the picnic table? I was very excited. I stooped to see. A doll! A cowgirl doll! Abandoned! Picnic debris had dumped onto the ground. Soda bottles, food packages, stubs of cigarettes. It was very cruel that the cowgirl doll with the freckled face and red-orange hair should be abandoned here. Her arms were outstretched. Her legs were at odd angles to her body and to each other. Because she had been dropped on her back, her eyes were partly closed, but you could see the glassy glisten beneath, of surprise and alarm. "Help me! Don't leave me!" Distinctly we heard this plea of Annie's, my friend and me. Her voice was whispery and small. Her chipped scarlet lips scarcely moved. Inside my hooded jacket, I bore Annie to safety. My friend guided me from the park by an obscure route. My friend preceded me to see if the way was clear. It was a quarter-mile to the carriage house and to the shadowy horse stall at the rear. In this way, in a trance of wonderment, Cowgirl Annie, the second found doll, was brought home. By this time, the little 4th-grade girl who lived on Catamount Street was rarely spoken of, for she had gone away and would not be returning. And this new girl who'd gone missing from Prospect Heights Park, when her older sister and brother, who'd been supposed to be watching her at the swings, had been distracted by friends. She too had gone away and would not be returning. Another time, much alarm was raised at our school, though the missing girl was a 3rd grader at another school. Though we had heard the warnings about strangers many times by now, by 9th grade. The uniformed police officer who spoke to us from the auditorium stage reassured us that whoever took this child will be found. But these too were familiar words. Some of us smiled to hear. In the park that afternoon, there'd been solitary men. Always in a park near a playground, there are solitary men. And some of these men have criminal records. And these were taken into custody by police and questioned. But we knew the little girl would never be found. Now I was no longer taunted by the older boys on the school bus, for I was not one of the younger children. In my eyes, such hatred blazed for these boys, they had learned to avoid me. I learned that to be respected, you had to be steely, calm, and still, or you had to be reckless. You could not show weakness. You could not be nice. you would be ground beneath the boots of the strong like a beetle. But now the second of the found dolls had come into my life. I did not care what these boys thought of me, or anyone else except my friend. The second of the found dolls, when I was 14. Not soon, for my friend cautioned me against recklessness. Not soon, but within 2 years, the third of the found dolls entered my life. Then, after 11 months, a fourth doll found. These were not local dolls. These were dolls discovered miles from Prospect Hill and other towns, for I had a driver's license. I had use of my mother's car. At school, I was a quiet student, but my teachers seemed to like me, and my grades were usually high. At home, I was quiet in a way that maddened my father, for it seemed to him sullen, rebellious. I had a habit of grunting instead of talking, or mumbling under my breath. I had a habit of not looking at any adult, including my parents, for it was easier that way. My friend did not want me to look at him. My friend understood the efforts such looks require. You can look into a doll's eyes without the fear of the doll seeing into your soul in a way hostile to you. But you can't be so careless looking at anyone else. And this too maddened my father, that I would not meet his gaze. I was disrespectful. My father said, "I will send him into the army, not to college. They'll straighten him out there." My mother pleaded, "Robbie should see a therapist. I've told you. Please let me take him to a therapist." So it happened, on the day of my 18th birthday, I had an appointment with Dr. G, a psychotherapist whose specialty was troubled adolescents. I sat in a chair facing Dr. G in a trance of fear and dislike, not raising my eyes to hers, but staring resolutely at the floor at her feet. Dr. G's office was sparsely furnished. Dr. G did not sit behind a desk, but in a comfortable chair, so that I could see her legs, which were the legs of a stout middle-aged woman, and I thought how much preferable it was at school, where our teachers sat behind desks so that you could see only the tops of their bodies mostly, not their legs. It was easy to think of them as big, ungainly dolls that way, whose jaw hinges were always moving. Dr. G asked me to sit in a chair facing her, about 5 feet from her, and this too was a comfortable chair, though I did not feel comfortable in it, and I knew I must be vigilant. "Robbie, talk to me, please. Your mother has said that your grades are very good. You don't have trouble at school communicating, evidently. But at home..." The more kindly the woman was, the less I trusted her. The more insistently she looked at my face, the less inclined I was to raise my eyes to her. My friend had cautioned, "Don't trust, not for an instant. You'll be finished." It was then I noticed a doll in a chair on the farther side of the room. Her head was large for her body, and her face seemed to glow or glare with an arrogant sort of beauty. Her thick lashed eyes were fixed upon me. Dr. G's clients included young children, I'd been told. Teenagers, children, troubled. Though the office was sparely furnished, yet there were a number of dolls of varying sizes and types, each distinctive and unusual. A collector's item, on shelves, on a windowsill, in this one white wicker rocking chair, which was a child-sized chair. Barely I could hear the therapist's voice, which was warm, friendly, and kindly, so powerful was the doll's hold upon me. "You're admiring my antique Dresden doll. It's dated 1841, and is in quite good condition. It's made of wood, with a painted face. The colors have scarcely faded." Dr. G was clearly hoping that I would react to this information, but I sat silent, frowning. I would not smile as others had smiled in my place, nor would I ask some polite but silly question. As a boy, I could not be expected to care about dolls. Staring at the doll who stared at me with marble eyes, It reminded me of baby Emily's eyes. In those eyes, a subtle sign of recognition. It was exciting. The Dresden doll did seem to know me. Because of the therapist's presence, however, the Dresden doll was not in the least frightened of me. She was a beautiful doll, though made of wood, and unlike any of my found dolls. At first you thought she had dark wavy hair. Then you saw that the hair was just wood, painted dark brown. Some of my very young clients prefer to talk to a doll than to me, Mrs. G said. But I don't suppose that's the case with you, Robbie. I shook my head no. It was not the case with Robbie. Elsewhere in the therapist's office were smaller dolls. On a shelf was a gaily painted Russian doll, which I knew had another smaller doll inside it, and another smaller doll within that. I did not like these Russian dolls. That made me feel slightly sick. I thought of how a woman carries a baby inside her, and how terrifying it would be if that baby carried another baby inside it. There were rag dolls arranged on a shelf like puppets. There were little music boxes covered in seashells and mother of pearl, and there were Japanese fans and animals carved of wood. Though Dr. G had furnished her office sparely, the colors of the furniture and the carpet on the floor were dull, dun colors that could not excite any emotion. As Dr. G wore dull, dun-colored, and shapeless clothing that could not excite any emotion. Yet these collector's items suggested another, more complex and secret side to Dr. G. Tell me why you find it so difficult to talk to your parents, Robbie. Your mother has said, in her quiet, stubborn woman voice, Dr. G spoke. Because there is nothing to say. Because my real life is elsewhere, where no one can follow. I did not like many people. Especially, I did not like adults who wanted to help me. But I think I liked Dr. G. I wanted to help Dr. G establish a diagnosis for what was wrong with me, so that my parents would be satisfied and leave me alone. Yet I could not think how to help her, for I could not tell her the secrets closest to my heart. Badly I wanted to examine the Dresden doll with the painted face. Badly I wanted to take the Dresden doll home with me. In all, I would see Dr. G approximately 12 times over the course of 5 or 6 months. I was not a good client, I think. I never opened up to Dr. G as troubled people do to their therapists in movies and on TV. During these visits, did I reveal anything significant to Dr. G? Never. But I was riveted by the Dresden doll who stared at me boldly through the full 50-minute session. The Dresden doll was not afraid of me because she was protected by Dr. G, who never left the office and never left us alone together. You can't touch me, not me. I belong to her. You didn't find me. I was always here, and I will be here when you are not. Such a look came into my face, of longing and anger. Dr. G broke off whatever she was saying to exclaim, Robbie, what are you thinking? Did something come into your mind just now? Something coming into my mind like a maddened hornet? A paper airplane sailing? A nudge in the ribs? Quietly, I shook my head no. Lowering my gaze to stare at a spot on the carpet, as my friend had warned, never make eye contact. You know better. This was so. I had made a mistake, but it was not a fatal mistake, for no one knew except the Dresden doll. She was only a doll, I thought, something made of wood. She could not be a found doll, for I could never touch her, never bring her to the carriage house for safekeeping among her sister dolls. Is something distracting you, Robbie? Is it something in this room? I shook my head no. Would you be more comfortable if I moved to another room? I shook my head no. Then at our next meeting, which would be our last meeting, I was shocked to see that the Dresden doll had been removed from the white wicker rocking chair. In her place was an embroidered pillow. I said nothing, of course. My face locked into a frozen expression and would not betray me. I think you might be more comfortable now, Robbie. Dr. G spoke gently, proddingly. I hated this homely, graceless female now, that she sensed the hold of the Dresden doll over me. She alone, of all the world, might guess my fascination with found dolls. I hated her, and I feared her, that suddenly I might lose control. I might begin to shout at her, demanding to see the Dresden doll again, or I might burst into tears, confessing to her that I had stolen the found dolls that were hidden in the carriage house. It was a terrible thing to feel that you might break down. You might utter a confession that could not then be retrieved. And so, I did not speak at all. My throat shut tight. Dr. G asked her usual picky, little friendly-seeming questions to which I could not reply, and after some minutes of awkward silence on my part, Dr. G handed me a notebook and a pen and suggested I write out my thoughts, if I could not speak to her. I took the notebook from her, and with the smile of a shy but determined boy, I wrote, "Goodbye," and handed it back to her. Already I was on my feet. Already I was gone. After high school, it was decided that I would defer college. My grades had been high, especially in physics and calculus, and at graduation my name had been asterisked in the commencement program to indicate summa cum laude. But I had not gotten around to applying for any college or university. My teachers and school guidance counselor were perplexed by this decision, but my mother understood to a degree. For my father had departed from the house on Prospect Hill, and you might think that a concerned son would not leave his mother alone in such a large house at such a time. Only I knew. I could not leave my found dolls. I would not risk strangers finding them. The possibility of the found dolls being discovered was too terrible to consider. Often when I couldn't sleep, I took a flashlight and went out into the carriage house. By moonlight, the carriage house seemed to float like a ghost ship on a dark sea, and all was still except for the cries of nocturnal birds, and in summer, a raucous sound of nocturnal insects buzzing and humming like insidious thoughts. The found dolls lay quiet in their makeshift cribs of plywood and hay. They had been placed side by side like sisters, though each doll was quite distinct from the others, and might have made a claim for being the most beautiful. Mariska, Annie, Valerie, Evangeline, Barbie. Barbie was one of that notorious breed, Barbie dolls. In this case, Bride Barbie, for the angelic blonde girl doll wore a white silk gown that shimmered and shook when you lifted her, and on her flawless head, a lace veil. Her figure was not a child's figure, but that of a mature, miniature woman, with pronounced breasts straining against the bodice of the wedding dress, a ridiculously narrow waist, and shapely hips. My friend had observed, "One of these will do. We should give Barbie a chance." Barbie had given me the most difficulty, in fact. You would not think that a doll so small and weighing so little could scream so loud, and that her fingernails, shaped and polished and very sharp, could inflict such damage on my bare forearms. "If she doesn't obey, you can chop her into pieces. Tell her she's on trial for her life." In her makeshift crib of plywood and hay, Barbie lay motionless, as if in a trance of great surprise and great loathing. Not ever would Barbie cast a sidelong glance at her sister doll beside her, a soft, boneless cloth doll with a startlingly pale, pretty face and a little tiara on her platinum blonde curls, sparkling with tiny rhinestones. Evangeline had come from Juniper Court, a trailer village on the outskirts of our town. Hardly protesting, Evangeline had come with me at my friend's suggestion, for she was a doll lacking a substantial body. Her head was made of some synthetic material like plastic, or a combination of plastic and ceramic, but her body was boneless, like a sock puppet. She could not put up much of a struggle, and seemed almost to fall before me in a swoon of abnegation, as a sock puppet might do for whom the only possible life is generated by another's antic hand. No one had searched for Evangeline. It was believed Evangeline was a runaway like other children in her family and in Juniper Court. When I left the dolls, I covered them beneath a khaki-covered canvas, neatly. This khaki-colored canvas was the cleanest covering I could find in the carriage house. Many items of furniture and other abandoned and forgotten things in the carriage house were covered with pieces of canvas that were soiled and discolored, but the covering for the found dolls was reasonably clean. I would have drawn quilts over them to keep them warm, but I worried that someone would notice and become suspicious. No one ever came into this part of the carriage house, not for years, but I had an irrational fear that someone might come into the carriage house and discover my found dolls. My friend said, "They're happy here. They're at peace. This is the best they've been treated in their short, tragic lives." One night, not long after I'd stopped seeing Dr. G, I heard a sound at the entrance to the stable, like a footfall, and shone my light there, thinking in dismay, "Mother! I will have to kill her." But there was no one there, and when I returned to the house it was darkened as before. I was relieved, I think, for it would not be easy or pleasant matter to subdue, silence, and suffocate Mother, so much larger than any of the found dolls. Most nights Mother slept deeply. I think Mother was heavily medicated. Sometimes I stood in the doorway of Mother's room, seeing her motionless mannequin figure by the moonlight, beneath the bedclothes of a large canopy bed, and listening to her rhythmic breathing, which sometimes shaded into a soft snoring that was a comfort to me. For when Mother was awake and in my presence, always Mother was aware of me and looking at me. Always Mother was addressing me and asking me a question, waiting then for me to reply when I had no reply for her. Though I only murmured or grunted responses and avoided looking Mother in the face, Mother was never discouraged and continued to chatter in my presence, as if she were thinking aloud and yet at the same time addressing me. My friend laid a sympathetic hand on my shoulder. It was the first time that my friend had appeared inside my house. "You know that it would be better, Robbie, if the woman were silenced. But this is not a task for the lily-livered." How strange this was. Lily-livered was not a phrase my friend had ever spoken before. But lily-livered was a phrase that my father had sometimes used in a voice of mockery. There was a sixth found doll, as it turned out, a disappointing one, but I could not have guessed so beforehand. Still, I kept Trixie with the others, though sometimes I didn't remove the canvas from her crib, for her sour, curdled milk pug face and reproachful green marble eyes were discomforting to me, and her cheap, sleazy, silly costume, a low-cut sequin top that showed the cleavage of her breasts, and a frilly, frothy ballerina skirt in matching turquoise, and spike-heeled little shoes were frankly embarrassing. No more of Trixie. I will draw the khaki-covered canvas over Trixie, voila, as my friend says. And the seventh doll. The seventh found doll, a boy doll. His name was an exotic name, Barata. He had taffy-colored skin of the finest rubber that so resembled human flesh you shivered as your fingertips caressed his face and felt a semblance of warmth, as the capillaries closed beneath the surface of the skin. And his eyes were not glassy brown, but a warm chocolate brown, and thick-lashed, beautiful as any girl's eyes. Barata wore chino shorts, a sky-blue t-shirt, blue sneakers on his small feet, and no socks. His legs were well-formed with the look of small, sinewy muscles, more defined than his sister doll's legs. The palms of his hands were lighter colored than the rest of his body. I was fascinated by this, Did people of color normally have palms lighter than the rest of their body? I had not ever known any people of color. No one in our family did. My friend said, "You see, Robbie, you were prejudiced against boys, but now you have a surprise in store." Barada was one of our larger dolls, with a sweet, pretty boy face and very black curly hair. His black eyelashes swept against his cheeks, which appeared to be lightly rouged. You could not have told if Barada's mouth was a boy mouth or a girl's. Barada was the only doll who tried to speak in actual words, not merely soft squeaking sounds. Barada's mouth moved, and I leaned to him to listen, but heard only the sounds like, "Where? Where is? Who are you? I don't want to be. I don't want to be here." The other found dolls might have exhibited some jealousy or envy of my taffy-skinned found boy doll, but they disguised their emotions well, for they knew their place and did not wish to offend me, who was their doll master. It was my friend who had told me, one day, "Robbie, you are the doll master. You must never surrender your authority." Mother said we have no choice, really. The house is so large, most of the rooms are shut off and unheated. A house of this size was meant for a large family, and now there is only us. Only us was hurtful to me to hear, as if only us was an admission of such shameful defeat. It had to be murmured, near inaudibly. "So what do you mean, Mother? Do you want to sell the house?" A clanging in my ears began, as of a fire alarm. I could barely hear my mother's reasonable voice asking me if I would call a realtor, if I would oversee the selling of the house. It's a profound decision. It's a profound step in our lives. But I think we have no choice. The property taxes alone are... It was so. Property taxes were rising. Taxes of all sorts were rising in New Jersey. Now there's no one in our family going to public school. It seems a shame to pay for public education. My sister was showing me brochures of condominiums on the river, 2- and 3-bedroom, very modern and stylish. Mother chattered nervously, excitedly. Mother would not expect me to react to her suggestion in any emphatic way, for that was not Robbie's nature. Father had not only departed the sprawling old Victorian house on Prospect Hill, but had also dissociated himself from it entirely. In the divorce settlement, he signed over the property to my mother. There were to be no alimony payments, for my mother had a small income from investments she inherited. Mother sometimes wept, but more often expressed relief. Your father has gone. Since the separation several years before, Father and I rarely saw each other. Father did not like to return to our suburban town. It was an effort for him, as he made clear, to attend my high school graduation, and to resolutely avoid my mother and her relatives. And I did not like to leave our suburban town, and so we exchanged emails occasionally, and less frequently spoke on the phone. It was the easiest tie to break, my friend consoled me, the tie that was badly frayed to begin with. You could say that Mother and I were close, in the way of two actors on a TV show who've been together on the set for many seasons, reciting prepared scripts, uncertain of the direction in which their narrative was moving. What would be the fate of their characters, yet not anxious, not quite yet. I was 20 years old. Soon then, it seemed, I was 22 years old. No more than one found doll a year seemed necessary or prudent. At the time Mother wanted to sell our house, I was 23 years old. I had not attended college after all. In an alternative life, I would have majored in science and math at a good university, perhaps Princeton. In an alternative life, I would be a graduate student now at Caltech perhaps, or MIT. I might be engaged or even married. No, probably not. Not engaged and not married. Quickly, time passes if you don't keep up with your generation of high school graduates. where time seemed to have virtually stopped for my mother, who continued to see a small circle of women friends, several of them widows and older female relatives. Over the years, time moved rapidly for me. I was not unhappy, though you would have to call me reclusive. I did not consider myself a dropout from society or a failure in any way that my father considered himself a failure, and that had poisoned his life. My relationships with the world were primarily through the internet, where I'd established a website under the name The Doll Master, through which I'd made many acquaintances. Here I posted shadowy, oblique, and poetic photographs of the found dolls, images too dark and irresolute to be identified, though visitors to the site found them haunting, eerie, makes me want to see more. My website visitors have become faithful correspondents, and my emails take up a large part of my life, for it is thrilling for me, as I believe it has to be for them, and some of these females, I think, that we skirt the edges of our essential subject, and seek metaphors and poetic turns of speech to express our forbidden desires. For it has been revealed to me as a fact that where the dull essential nature of our lives is eliminated, such as age, identity, education, employment, places of residence, family ties, daily routine, etc., the thrilling essential is revealed. Mother believes that I have contacted a real estate agent in town, and I have met with her. Mother believes that the house is listed tastefully, with no ugly sign at the foot of our lawn, and only serious home seekers who can afford the property considered. But Mother does not ply me with questions about the house sale, for Mother would rather not think of where we would live if the house were really sold, and what our circumstances would be. And I am comforting to Mother by saying, with a smile, "One step at a time, Mother. The real estate market is flat now. We might not have any serious interest until spring." Yet that domestic comfort has come to an abrupt end. My friend has abandoned me, I think, for my friend has no advice to give me now. It was the occasion of a new found doll. I had not brought a found doll back to the carriage house for 13 months, which I believed was a sign of fortitude and character, for I could not be called impulsive or reckless, rather over-scrupulous, I think. For when I brought my new found doll to the carriage house and lay her in her little crib beside the others, I lingered too long in a state of infatuation. I lost track of the time as dusk shaded into night, and I gazed at little farmer girl in the beam of my flashlight and marveled at her uniqueness. All my dolls, with the possible exception of the rag doll Evangeline, who lacked a substantial body. This doll was soft, willless, hardly more than fabric, with a hard doll head, yet strangely appealing. Not beautiful, not even pretty, but winning. For when I washed away the grime on little farmer girl's face, she was revealed as a sweet, homely cousin sort of girl, with stiff pigtails, a funny mouth, wide, unblinking marble eyes of an amber hue. Her body was made of cloth, from which some of the stuffing had leaked out. She wore denim bib overalls and a red plaid shirt beneath, and on her spindly legs red tights, and on her tiny feet boots. Her costume was dirty but yet colorful, for she had not been discarded for long, it seemed. I'd pulled little farmer girl out of the trash behind a suburban train station, where there is an old, unused railroad yard with a fence around it. Long fallen into disrepair, no one comes here, though passengers awaiting the train are gathered on the platform only a quarter-mile away. Except children, sometimes, or runaways. It was plausible to think that little farmer girl was a runaway, whose difficult life had brought her to this place and to my discovery of her in the peaceful interregnum between trains, when the depot was virtually deserted. It was a game of kidnap, I decided, since little farmer girl was so soft-bodied there was no effort involved in lifting her, folding her, and carrying her beneath my hooded jacket when she struggled. I tied her wrists and ankles and stuffed a rag in her mouth so that her cries were muffled and could not be heard by anyone farther than 6 feet away. No effort then to place little farmer girl in the trunk of a station wagon and to drive slowly back home to the top of Prospect Hill. Why little farmer girl exerted such a spell over me is a mystery. But I suppose, as my friend would say with a laugh, "Robbie, you're so funny. Each of your dolls was enthralling to you initially." I thought, too, that I would begin taking pictures of little farmer girl that very night to record more conscientiously than I had the others before the inevitable incursions of time, decomposition, and decay intervened. My experience was that flash photos were particularly effective in these circumstances, as more poetic and artistic than photographs taken by day, even in the shadowy interior of the stall. "Robbie? Is that you? Why are you here, Robbie? What are you doing?" So absorbed had I been squatting over little farmer girl, I hadn't heard Mother approach the rear of the carriage house. Too late, I saw the groping beam of her flashlight moving upon me, and upon the rows of found dolls on the floor of the stall that occupied most of the stall. "Robbie, what is—" In the crude light of Mother's flashlight, the found dolls were revealed as small skeletons with rags of clothing and wisps of hair on their battered skulls. Their faces were skull faces, with mirthless grins and eyeless sockets. Their bone arms were spread as if for an embrace. This was Mother's crude light, not the light of the doll master. Quickly I took the flashlight from Mother's shaking hand. Quickly I comforted her, telling her that these were sculptures that I had done, but had not wanted to show anyone. "Sculptures? Here?" I would explain to her, I said, but first I would shut the outer door. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Campfire Ghost Stories with the Malden Public Library. If you enjoyed this story by Joyce Carol Oates, it's her collection, The Doll Master. I strongly recommend picking up a copy either electronically from our catalog at www.maldenpubliclibrary.org or a physical copy requested from our network. Again, thank you for joining us, and while we are taking a brief hiatus, I do hope that this story lingers with you in the same disturbing ways that it's lingered with me, and that at the end of our time apart, you'll come back and listen to more campfire stories, maybe this time with darker, more October feel to them. Thanks again, and have a spooky evening.